We're going to be continuing with Barbara's story. This will be part 3, and we are going to be starting with chapter 8 of Le Partagee by Barbara and Christine de Connick. Monday, the 2nd of June. At 7 o'clock in the morning, the police were waiting outside St. Bonaventure Church, ready for action. On foot, in patrol cars, in plainclothes, and in uniform. Not a single branch of the force was missing. It was a chilly June morning. They must have been cold after waiting 2 hours for us, but I was not the one complaining. A crowd of curious onlookers had also gathered. The whole city knew what was happening, and were preparing to laugh at us once again. They remembered the demonstration of August 1972, which ended in chaos, and they expected another fiasco. I was among the first to arrive at the official meeting point in front of the Grand Bazaar. Friends from Lyon and the movement's organisers were already there. Then the great deception began. The police laughed as they watched me enter alone, carrying weapons and luggage. They thought the other women had lost their nerve. I went in and out talking with people from Lyon and the journalists, who kindly agreed to play their part in distracting the police. While I was keeping up the diversion, the other women arrived through little side streets. The Lyon activists, together with 5 other women who knew the plan, guided them. They were told not to come near the square, but to make their way discreetly to Saint Nizier Church. Since it stood in the middle of the prostitution district, any women seen by the police would simply appear to be going about their normal business. By the time the police finally realised something was wrong, more than 60 women had already entered Saint Nizier one by one, with the agreement of the parish priest, Father Bial. By the end of this first day of the strike, there were around 100 of us inside Saint Nizier. For a bunch of so-called silly whores who can't read or write, I don't think we did too badly. Outside, members of Lyon distributed leaflets to passers-by explaining the reasons for our action. In the name of the Collective of Prostitute Persons of Lyon, we had prepared the following letter to the public. Hounded by the police, the prostitutes of Lyon have taken refuge in Saint Nizier Church. Letter to the public. It is mothers who are speaking to you, women trying to raise, alone, their children as best they can, and who today are carrying the burden of them. Yes, we are prostitutes. But if we prostitute ourselves, it is not because we are vicious women. It is simply the means that we have found to cope with life's difficulties. Society is accustomed to judging us and rejecting us into a ghetto of contempt or pity. We are regarded as dirty, abnormal women, yet people continue to say, there have to be some. Because there have to be some, French law doesn't prohibit prostitution. In principle, we are treated like citizens, like everyone else. But because society is ashamed of wanting us, we are treated like criminals, people upon whom the police can exercise every repressive power. We are buried under police reports on completely unfounded grounds. The only fact established is that we are known as prostitutes. From that alone, it is enough for us to be prosecuted for behaviour likely to provoke debauchery. And now we are even being sentenced to prison. Why is this happening? What does the minister want? To make Lyon a clean city in order to erase the consequences of the Lyon affair of 1972? Or so that he can present himself as a candidate for mayor? Or to force us to demand the reopening of the brothels, a profitable source of revenue for the public authorities? The last explanation seems the most likely. Let us say it clearly, Mr. President. We will not return to the brothels. We will never agree to become civil servants of sex, bringing money into the state's coffers. Already, today, the state is the greatest pimp imaginable. All these police reports, we receive 3 or 4 every day, each carrying a fine of at least 60 francs. Together with the taxes we are now being asked to pay as kept women or hostesses, who profits from us, if not the state? French society, which you say you wish to reform, must accept its responsibility, Mr. President. If it continues to say there must be prostitutes, then it is unjust for the women it wants in that role to be treated like criminals, beaten with truncheons, and imprisoned. For several weeks now, one after another, we have been sentenced by the courts of Lyon and Villebon to prison terms, simply for the alleged offence of smiling at male passers-by. This is how, during a year proclaimed International Women's Year, we are treated. You declared yourself to be the president of all the French people. Then you were also the president of the prostitutes. Today we have taken refuge in a church in the centre of Lyon to escape police action against women who are supposed to be imprisoned. As Supreme Magistrate, we ask you to suspend the prosecutions of which we are the victims. Otherwise, the police will have to massacre us inside the church. Not one of us will go to prison, Mr. President. While awaiting a response from you, please accept, Mr. President of the Republic, the assurance of our respectful consideration. The prostitute women of Lyon. The women thought everything would be over within 48 hours at most. They were full of hope. I was less optimistic. I thought it would take a week, perhaps 10 days, before the authorities would even pay attention to us. I had always followed strikes in the newspapers, and I knew that nothing was resolved quickly. They would certainly try to wear us down. Everyone settled in quietly, a little intimidated by the surroundings. We organised one corner for sleeping, another for eating and preparing coffee. The women brought plenty of rubbish bins so the church would remain clean. The first hours passed in a mood of exhilaration. Besides, we were extremely busy. But as the day went on, anxiety gradually appeared. The women were not used to being shut indoors, inactive, waiting around. The inactivity got on their nerves. For many of us, the first night was particularly difficult. I felt calm and was not too distressed. My years in prison had taught me how to endure inactivity, discomfort, and communal living. Other women, however, struggled greatly. On that first day, I left to drive around the city to maintain the strike outside the church and inform the women working along the ring roads about our decision. The women on the ring roads specialised in what was known as fantasy prostitution. They only gave blowjobs. Other women often looked down on them, considering them rather amateurish. In reality, these women protected themselves by exposing themselves as little as possible. Their bodies belonged to them, their clients hardly touched them. I had to persuade them to either stop working or join us in the church. These conversations were not always peaceful. Everyone was tense and aggressive, far more than I liked. Above all, I did not feel comfortable playing the role of a police officer. My height had always been a disadvantage because at first sight I tend to intimidate people, and that distorts my relationships with the women we were trying to reach. We had just committed ourselves to a struggle against police repression, and I was fully aware of that. But I wanted to go further, beyond police harassment. It was every form of repression and injustice that I was fighting. This is why the role of strike organiser didn't suit me at all. I never felt entitled to force other women to follow us. Convince them, yes, but maintain discipline, no. Ulla was much tougher than I was. She was right. Thanks to her, many hesitant or timid women held out until the end. From the very first morning of the occupation, we held a meeting and drafted a letter to Cardinal Renard, the Archbishop of Lyon, asking him to intervene on our behalf and not allow us to be expelled from the church. We appealed to the right of sanctuary that Father Bial had spontaneously granted us. Some people may be shocked, we wrote, perhaps even you, but can Christians really believe that there are dirty women and that a church should not serve as a refuge for them? Even before entering Saint Nizier, we had announced to the press that we intended to appeal to Françoise Giroux, the Secretary of State for Women's Affairs, to present our problems to her. The response was immediate. That very Monday, before we had even contacted her directly, Madame Giroux refused to see us. "It is not my responsibility," she said, "but that of the Minister of Interiors." So, was he also the Secretary of State for Women's Affairs? Once again, we are being treated not as women, but as delinquents and troublemakers. From the police's side, there was open mockery. The police prefect, who refused to see us in May, was quoted as saying that our movement would not get very far. "You can clearly see," he added, "its origins and its objectives, given the organisations supporting it. As for me, I have no intention of changing my position, nor of altering the police's attitude towards these people." Once again, people with influence used it to reduce us to nothing. That only confirmed that we had been right to resort to such a spectacular action. Faced with the Lyon police alone, dialogue had become impossible. Tuesday, the 3rd of June. Hardly anyone had slept, and we all looked exhausted. At 7 o'clock, the police were again outside the church, convinced they would soon see us packing our bags, defeated and beaten. But nothing happened. As soon as the beds had been folded away and the chapels converted from dormitories, we held a meeting. We agreed that we had to appear relaxed and not give any satisfaction to those waiting outside. In fact, morale rose dramatically thanks to the people of the neighbourhood. The women whom society calls respectable knocked at the door, bringing us a magnificent breakfast. Coffee, bread, butter, even croissants donated by a local baker. Above all, they brought us armfuls of flowers to encourage us. How could we ever thank them for such generosity? They were the first people to show that they regarded us not as outcasts, but as women like themselves. What happiness! We wanted to draw attention to ourselves, yes, but we never imagined we would receive sympathy. Decent people are coming to us. What a revolution! It's extraordinary, one of the women said. In a single stroke, there is no longer any barrier between me and ordinary people. I never believed this was possible. After all these gifts, I wanted to speak with the Vice Squad officers, smiling and far more relaxed than any of the other women were able to be. Father Bial bought every newspaper, and we rushed to see what was being written about us. In reality, none of the regional daily newspapers took us very seriously. Only Liberation devoted its front page to us, under the headline, Girls of Joy in the House of the Lord. A few words by Claude Jaguet gave us courage. The wall of silence has been broken, and it is an undeniable first victory. Le Monde dedicated a long article to us, but still classified the affair under miscellaneous news. Outside, the crowds gathered on the church steps throughout the day. Conversations flourished. Everyone had an opinion, some for us, some against. Even the most sympathetic often said, "Leave these poor women alone. They are necessary. Reopen the brothels, and everything will be fine." Reopen the brothels? Absolutely not. None of us wanted to hear that proposal. We refused to become sex workers in factories, women half dead inside. The example of the Barb's hotels in Paris was enough. Nor did we want pity. It was just as shocking that the only argument people used in our defence was our supposed necessity. What kind of society justifies the presence of women on the streets because of their sexual misery? Pity and mere tolerance would never restore our dignity as women. For those people who congratulated themselves simply because they did not condemn us, we remained women who had been discarded, refused, safety valves, nothing more. Those who opposed us spoke far more violently. It's a disgrace. That, in a church. Their mothers, they should be put in prison. These people asked what right we had to speak at all when everyone preferred to pretend we didn't exist. We spoke about our children. Only respectable women deserve children, they said. And above all, how dare we profane a church simply by our presence? We answered those self-proclaimed Christians by claiming the rights of every citizen, because that was how we ourselves were being accused. We came into the church because we needed love, because we had children to raise as best as we could. We came, like any other Christian, not to glorify ourselves, but to ask God to help us and love us, as he loved Mary Magdalene. We had no desire to profane the church whatsoever. I ask, is the right to pray reserved only for those who slandered their neighbours, spread malicious rumours to destroy another person's chances in life, or forbid their children from playing with black or Arab children, or spit on Jews, for the greater glory of their God? Is there room in your church only for those who refuse a piece of bread to a homeless person, and who judge good and evil as if they themselves were God? He, we are told, is forgiveness and love. Then why should we not have the right to enter a church? We who know human suffering so well, in order to allow him to judge us rather than you other people. During the first few days of our presence in Saint Nizier, we had never seen so many women suddenly seized with a desire to pray. Was it religion, curiosity, or simply a desire to satisfy their hatred of us? I would not presume to know. This Tuesday unfolded almost by itself in perfect order. Most of the women were discovering communal life, camping, and the organisation of domestic shared tasks. Everything went smoothly. Everyone took a turn sweeping, making coffee, washing dishes, or cleaning the toilets in the tiny space. We realised that if we were to hold out, we needed discipline. But no one gave orders or demanded anything of anyone. Almost miraculously, the church remained spotless. Not a scrap of paper or a single cigarette end was left on the floor, despite the constant stream of visitors. Everything was neatly folded away and stored in the chapels. Visitors were always offered a cup of coffee thanks to the enormous stove that people in the neighbourhood had brought us. We hung a large banner across the front of the church reading, "Our children do not want their mothers to go to prison." At the entrance, 2 or 3 of the women took turns standing guard. Visitors became more and more numerous, first journalists, then neighbourhood action groups, feminists and non-violent activists. Everyone wanted to show their support or help us endure our voluntary confinement. Food continued to arrive as if by a miracle, even strawberries from a local restaurateur. People offered to send musical groups, films, books to keep us entertained. During one of our afternoon meetings, after Francois Giroud's refusal, Allah suggested that we appeal to Michel Durafour, the Minister of Labour. We were absolutely determined to find someone within the government willing to speak to us. And as for the Minister of Interiors, certainly not. The question remained unresolved. The day passed in discussions with journalists. That evening, Cardinal Renard issued a statement in response to our letter. He confirmed his solidarity with Lynid, acknowledged that many people were attacking the movement for supporting us, and declared, "A church is a place of prayer, not a public platform." But he added, "We must ask ourselves all one conversation. Why have these women, most of them mothers, come here?" Although no one intervened, insulting telephone calls poured into the parish. Father Bial even received threats. An anonymous correspondent ordered us to leave the church before noon the following day or face a violent intervention. In reality, no one came. We continued to wait for these brave defenders of morality who had not dared to identify themselves. Still, no one came. By evening, most of the women were exhausted with nervousness, and everyone went to bed early. Nothing decisive had happened. We simply had to wait and hold on. Wednesday, the 4th of June. Representatives of the press came in even greater numbers, proof that our story was beginning to attract attention. Otherwise, nothing changed. No one in government wanted to speak to us. Allah took charge of answering newspapers and major national radio stations. She passed on the regional newspapers, the weeklies, and left-wing publications and foreign correspondence to me. My first interview was for a British television channel. I was a little nervous. Soon afterwards, Italian journalists arrived with boxes of chocolate and gifts. Very quickly, women from every tendency of the feminist movement came to see us. Their numbers surprised me. I had no idea the movement had become so large in France. Prostitutes in other cities had also begun to mobilize. That morning, a delegation of women from Marseille arrived. Around 50 of them had decided to remain with us in the church as a gesture of solidarity. The newspapers reported that some of us had been received that day by Nicole Pasquier, the delegate for Women's Affairs in the Rhône-Alpes region, and by Madame Ruby, the vice president of the Rhône General Council. This was false. Madame Pasquier had received representatives of Lynid who had gone to plead our case, not us. Nobody wanted to receive us. We were a poisoned gift that everyone tried to pass on to someone else under one pretext or another. The police prefect still refused every meeting. He was waiting, he said, for the church to be evacuated so that we would once again be isolated and vulnerable. He could wait. As for the mayor of Lyon, he began his grand performance, intending to lock us away in the future Eros Centre that he had dreamed of for years, a place we would soon call the Pradel House. He declared that we were right, that the law was hypocritical towards us. What he really meant was, let's legalize prostitution, and they will no longer have any grounds to trouble us. One small change in the newspapers was worth noting. Le Monde had moved our story into the society section. Thanks for the promotion. The press was beginning to realize that the affair was not merely a source of amusing anecdotes, as suggested by the first headline in L'Aurore, with charms and luggage, but that we perhaps touched on a fundamental problem. The entire left and far left press crowded in to see us. Political parties wanted to understand our motives. Why have we got involved in such a dangerous struggle, they wondered. Some clearly did not want to become entangled in a difficult issue by openly supporting us. One journalist said to me, "But you know how to speak." Then he added, "You've been in here for 3 days now. Haven't there been any problems with the women, the men, the drug addicts, the alcoholics? How are you managing?" The poor man simply believed the image of prostitutes that his upbringing had taught him. A prostitute, in his mind, had to be illiterate, a nymphomaniac, a drug addict, an alcoholic. I couldn't help laughing in his face. Yet it was serious. We were disturbing people by showing them an image completely different to the stereotype of the classic prostitute. Even when the evidence was right before their eyes, they still refused to see reality. Yes, several of us had completed education. No, none of us, inside Saint Nizier, tried to assault a journalist or a visitor during the 10 days of confinement, and no one suffered a drug withdrawal crisis. It is true that life in seclusion was difficult, above all because of the anxiety of waiting for what the next day might bring. Up to now, all our efforts had produced nothing, and that evening the meeting was rather gloomy. But we remained determined to stay, and we had to encourage the women who were unaccustomed to being confined indoors or who found inactivity hard to bear, so each of us acted a little, pretending to be more optimistic and relaxed than we really were. By the end of the day, everyone was exhausted. That at least allowed us to go to bed around 9 o'clock, ready to be up again at 6 o'clock in the morning for the General Assembly, where we would decide what steps we would take during the next day. Thursday, the 5th of June. That day, there were 204 of us in the church. A delegation of women from Paris arrived early in the morning, bringing a letter of support signed by around 50 Parisian prostitutes. Little by little, we realised that all the cities of France were following our movement. This was no longer simply about the attitude of the Lyon police, but about the general condition imposed on prostitutes throughout the whole country. The women of Grenoble also announced their support, accompanied by 2,000 francs to help us continue the strike. Women from the Midi came to tell us they were with us. We felt more and more surrounded by support, even though the public authorities still turned a deaf ear. That day, anger erupted among the women. We learned that 10 of us had been sentenced to prison terms. Justice was wasting no time while we were sheltered inside. During the day, Allah managed to be received by Cardinal Renard and by Mr. Pradelle. She came back without any precise answer, only proposals for mediation between the police and us, but that didn't mean very much. All day, I spoke with visitors who tried to understand why we were there. I attempted to explain to everyone how women came to prostitution, showing them that women were the safest currency of exchange in our society. Even if they never stood on the pavement, the woman who is prepared to sleep with her superior to obtain a pay rise or a promotion, the one who will not go as far as the bed but who arranges to reveal as much of her body as possible, displaying everything while giving and selling nothing. I also spoke of the women who have no means of affording a show or an evening in a restaurant. They are ready to end the night with the man who will take them out and introduce them to something other than the daily ham and chips meal. I spoke of women in housing estates who pay the shopkeepers at the end of the month with their bodies, and of the husband who turns a blind eye because his wages are too small and there are too many children. I also mentioned those who have a boyfriend, older but generous. When I stopped listing these examples, I looked people in the face, and they looked away. Some said, "Yes, it's true, women are often forced to become prostitutes." Others, scandalized, cried, "But it's not the same. Those women are married, they don't hang around outside, and above all, they don't take money for it." Yet we were talking about the same thing. Money handed directly from one hand to another as payment for prostitution brands the prostitute with infamy, but money given indirectly is called a gift, the great argument of respectable conscience, of hypocrisy. Personally, I see little difference between the woman whose payslip shows an extra 200 because she pleased someone, and the woman who has banknotes placed directly into her hand. The method of payment is different, but in both cases the woman is using her body. I also pointed out that being married made many things easier. In the case of a wife, people do not call things by their real names. A married woman is protected by her husband's name. She is forgiven far more deviations than a single woman. The Bible says, "To whoever has sinned much, much shall be forgiven." Society, for its part, says, "If you are married, everything shall be forgiven." I blame no one. I simply observe the condition of women in our time. I sympathize with the fate of those who are forced to accept a man without desire or love under the cover of legality. I pity the girl who married because she was pregnant but does not love her husband. I pity the one who endures her husband's lust every Saturday evening because the next day is Sunday and he can recover from his exploits. I pity the one who waits on her back until Mr. has finished, because only he has to finish. 2 minutes, and it is over. To these women, I say, you too are a form of prostitute serving male power. And I pity you, because I would rather have several clients for 2 minutes each than the same man behaving like a client for a lifetime. My remarks often provoked angry reactions from visitors. They took them as provocations, and above all found it difficult to accept that an ordinary prostitute should say such things to their faces. But for the first time in my life, I was fighting to regain my dignity as a woman, the dignity of all my comrades, and I was not going to waste my time with diplomacy. By the end of the day, more good news had reached us. 17 women from Saint Etienne had gone on strike in solidarity. The women of Nice announced that they too would stop work for the weekend. The movement was gathering speed. We reviewed the situation at our evening meeting. Despite the fatigue and the problems created by the growing length of the occupation, Morale remained high. We felt that our movement would not remain a mere passing incident. It had become a national movement and raised fundamental questions. At the end of the meeting, we drafted a second leaflet setting out our demands. Second letter to the public. Yes, indeed, however unbelievable it may seem, it is in the name of the full application of current French law that we are asking to leave our place of sanctuary. For the first time and last, we have succeeded in making ourselves heard by a large part of public opinion. Messages of support continue to reach us, prostitutes from other cities in France are joining us. All of this enables us to continue our action with dignity. Nothing can intimidate us now. The movement has become irreversible. We are at a turning point in the history of prostitution, and to leave the church, we will submit to no blackmail. Our immediate demands are based quite simply on French legislation, which is not being respected by the public authorities where we are concerned. The law states, 1. Prostitution is not a criminal offence, so why imprison those who engage in it? We can never repeat it often enough. Above all, most of us are mothers, and our children do not want us in prison. The tandem between approval and repression must come to an end. Those who are ultimately for prostitution have no right at the same time to want all prostitutes of an entire city to be punished in order to preserve the appearance of public morality. We therefore demand from the Minister of Justice or his representatives a firm assurance that we will no longer be arbitrarily sentenced to prison. 2. People may be fined for behaviour likely to incite debauchery. We do not deny the police the right to issue citations for such behaviour, but those behaviours should be clearly defined, and prostitution should no longer be automatically linked with debauchery. Once again, prostitution is not a criminal offence. Consequently, we demand that we no longer be punished simply for smiling at passers-by, and that every alleged offence be clearly specified and accompanied by a lawful identity check. 3. No discrimination should be directed against prostituted people. We therefore claim the right to the same respect enjoyed by every other citizen. 4. The state brothels are abolished. Consequently, there can be no question of reopening them under the guise of Eros centres or any other form. As we wrote to the President of the Republic, we will never accept becoming state-employed sex functionaries with restricted freedom. 5. Provisions already exist to help women who wish to leave prostitution freely and reintegrate into society. Experience shows, however, that this reintegration is made extremely difficult. We therefore openly denounce the failure to apply these measures. In the name of the law, let the women we are leave Saint Nizier Church, and may it remain forever the symbol of our liberation, all of us. Completed in Saint Nizier Church, Lyon, 5th of June, 1975. Friday, 6th of June. This time, it was Marseille that took action. The women who had travelled to Lyon decided on their return journey to follow our example. They sought sanctuary in the Church of the Réformés, and soon there were more than 100 of them in there. Likewise, in Grenoble, 50 women occupied St. Joseph Church. In Montpellier, finally, a movement also began to take shape. We no longer knew where we stood. Such a mass movement bewildered us, accustomed, as we always had been, to isolation and submission. The press continued to stir, sending representatives to us. The church had become a permanent debating hall. A video team from Paris arrived and offered to install screens outside the church to broadcast our discussions to the crowd gathered on the forecourt. We accepted enthusiastically because it was a remarkable way of communicating with people outside, and above all, a far more direct source of information than newspaper reports. Throughout the weekend, those among us who wished spoke before the camera, then watched the recording with the crew and decided together what should be cut. Once edited, the film was shown on the screens outside. People watched. Those who had imagined the worst inside the church saw calm women, modestly dressed, speaking without passion, without hatred, and above all, clearly. They no longer recognized the whores they met on the street. To help us through those days, a youth association that ran the Connick cinema came every day to show films. I should say that I never had a moment to myself. I spent all my time talking with one person or another, but what shocked me the most was the way that passers-by questioned the young people as they left. So then, how many times did you sleep with them on the altar? And other disgusting insinuations. The young people later told us they were ashamed to belong to the same sex as the people making such filthy remarks. In truth, they were so kind and respectful towards us that we felt we were among friends. Musicians had also been coming since the first days. I remember that when one of them arrived, he sat down on the floor without saying a word, and took from his large bag a whole collection of strange instruments. He began to play, quietly. The women approached him rather timidly. One began to sway gently to the rhythm, another picked up a tom-tom, another a tambourine. Little by little, the women themselves began to play, creating music around the theme. Sitting a little away, I watched my companions. Their mistrust first, then their astonishment at this young man who asked nothing of them and simply left them in peace. Soon, confidence and relaxation appeared. They looked happy, they laughed naturally, all of their hardness disappeared. I wanted to cry at the sight of that unique moment, which might never return. I thought that some women, finding genuine happiness in their own bodies and themselves, would later try and forget it because it might hurt too much afterwards, but perhaps others would keep it forever. One evening, I no longer remember which, the musicians came back, most of them accompanied by their wives, to hold a celebration in one of the rooms. For 2 hours we danced. Thanks to them we experienced truly wonderful moments in which we simply lived, forgetting our problems, and even forgetting that we lived in society's outcast. Besides, who could have distinguished in that party the famous dirty and vicious women from everyone else? Meanwhile, the prefecture still showed no signs of life. Allah tried to contact a member of the minister's office to ask for a dialogue. We were still waiting for someone willing to speak with us. The Director of Criminal Affairs at the Ministry of Justice was also approached. The replies remained vague. Finally, we decided to request the mediation of Simone Veil. Perhaps she would not reject us, as Françoise Giroud had done. One person openly and unequivocally supported us, the Archbishop of Marseille, who publicly declared, "And let no one tell me that prostitutes do not wish to leave prostitution. When a young woman, often a mother, becomes incapable of wishing for or even imagining another life, we ourselves should tremble with shame. Above all, we must understand that prostitutes are victims of economic deprivation, social deprivation, and emotional deprivation." Moreover, the Women's Rights League wrote to the newspapers, declaring that it affirms its complete solidarity with the movement of prostitutes struggling in Lyon, and bitterly regrets that Mrs. Françoise Giroud does not regard as part of the women's condition precisely that aspect which most clearly reflects the alienation of women in today's world and society. Saturday, the 7th of June. Almost all the women had adapted to our communal way of life, especially those who had previously lived in isolation and distrust. We were now completely relaxed and, above all, amazed by the solidarity being shown to us. The movement continued to grow elsewhere. During the night, a group of Parisian prostitutes and transvestite prostitutes sought sanctuary in the chapel of Saint Bernard, in the heart of the Montparnasse district. They were as numerous as we were. Early that morning, they distributed this leaflet. What we demand: 1. Repeal of Article 34, incitement to debauchery. No more fines or police reports. We propose fair taxation, giving us entitlement to social security and pensions, like all French mothers. 2. We recognise that prostitution is an occupation resulting from society's sexual imbalance. 3. We want to be citizens in our own right. We firmly reject 1. The reopening of brothels, even in the very modern and luxurious form of Eros centres. 2. Becoming sex functionaries without any freedom. 3. Being nationalised. And 4. Being municipalised. Our immediate demands: 1. Withdrawal of prison sentences imposed on the women of Lyon. 2. Repeal of the law providing imprisonment for repeat offences. 3. A government representative capable of understanding prostitutes' problems and finding common ground. 4. Reopening of hotels in prostitution districts. And 5. Application of laws allowing prostituted women to reintegrate into society. Signed, the Committee of Prostitute Women of Paris. Their demands were more legalistic than ours. They already spoke of replacing fines with taxation. We didn't mention that in Lyon, aware of the danger of such a position. They also demanded the reopening of hotels, but only in prostitution districts, and wanted prostitution recognised as a genuine profession. One article even joked as such. The 150 prostitutes occupying Saint Nizier Church have very precise but strangely limited demands. It reproached us, among other things, for not speaking enough about pimping. Why had that newspaper, like the police, never revealed what it knew about the subject if it wanted to broaden the debates? As far as we were concerned, we had said and written it plainly. The first pimp is the state. between fines, imaginary taxes, and taxes on our apartments, it had nothing to complain about. I should also point out that one of the newspapers most contemptuous towards us was the communist paper La Humanité. It never missed an opportunity to denounce us as provocateurs acting in the name of the law and order and legality. Its articles never spoke of prostitutes' demands or struggle, only of the grumbling and complaints of the peripatetic women. They even hinted at the phantom of pimps pulling the strings in this ridiculous, ambiguous movement. Quote, Marx, however, had spoken of prostitutes in very different terms. These articles always ended with a small tear shed for the victims, meaning, of course, these poor, irresponsible women. On the government side, certain officials had already revealed their plans. The Minister for Quality of Life, ironically enough, was advocating the abolition of the Martha-Richard law, in other words, the reopening of brothels in a more modern and more state-controlled form, supposedly to defeat private pimping. Supporters of this formula had some remarkable arguments. They complained that France ought to concern itself with the sexual comfort of its immigrant workers. Perhaps they also had the quality of life, of men, in mind. How depressing it all was, and where would our place have been in all this? We would no longer have been on the streets, certainly, but safely locked away, imprisoned, working on an assembly line with no contact with the outside world, all for the greater satisfaction of the respectable people. Mrs. Giroud, while claiming to defend us against the false pity of certain journalists, wrote in Le Monde, I have never passed, nor will I ever pass, judgment on a woman driven into prostitution, and if it were in my power to save even one, I would employ her immediately. She must have remembered that promise when 2 months later I announced that I had left prostitution. She sent me a cheque for 500 francs. But I really do believe I was effectively the only woman she ever saved. In Lyon, since Saint Nizier, at least 20 women had left prostitution, and to my knowledge, none of them had received any help from Miss Giroud. It is true that they had not appeared in the newspapers as I had. While the rest of the press was losing itself in speculation about the prostitutes' movements, Liberation continued its serious reporting, publishing an article entitled Becoming a Prostitute. It was the beginning of the testimonies that would later appear in a book written by the women themselves. We were no longer only talking about our group's immediate demands, but about the real issue. What is prostitution, and why and how does a woman end up on the streets? Sunday, 8th of June. After 6 days of occupation, we were still at a complete standstill. Every public figure made their own individual statement, but none agreed to meet us. In Marseille, the prostitutes were organising a direct action. Their decisions made us nervous somewhat, especially the remarks of one of their lawyers, who was also said to represent members of the underworld. This lawyer, in a hurry, claimed that he had already secured a meeting with representatives in the Ministry of Interior at the beginning of the week, and added that it was now necessary to organise prostitution in France. That sentence made us feel like there was some kind of trap being prepared. Allah openly protested. Allah and Barbara, the two names most frequently mentioned in the press and on the radio, had become the movement's public faces. Journalists wanted to turn us into celebrities. They needed figureheads. Every political tendency found something that suited it. The commercial media had seized on Allah, the blonde, determined star. Gaullists, feminists, and other progressive movements wanted to make me their standard bearer. I was the ideal social case. A former schoolteacher, single, independent. But in gathering around Allah and Barbara, they forgot one essential thing. The Lyon women's movement had begun through collective agreement and solidarity, and it continued through a community, through what the Liberation called the democracy of the prostitutes. There was no leader making decisions for everyone else, no outside manipulation. We knew why we were there, and every prostitute in Saint Nizier mattered equally. Every action and every statement to the press had been decided collectively in meetings. Those women, who no one talks about, whose names remain unknown to the public, without them there would be neither Barbara nor Allah. Every one of them did remarkable work during the occupation. I think of Manouche, Martine, Carole, Muriel, Christine, and many others. Saint Nizier gave us the chance to meet one another, to appreciate each other, and to discover one another. Because, I repeat, an action like ours is something exceptional for women, and even more so for women who are not accustomed to being regarded as full human beings. Finally, concerning Allah and Barbara, Much was said about us and about our relationship. It's true that we didn't always agree. Allah was criticised for her firmness during that week, and as for me, I'm determined she showed so much determination. Every strike needs a strong, uncompromising personality, otherwise no one would have the courage to hold out until the end. Monday, 9th of June. The women of Grenoble supported our action by asking the mediator, Mr. Aim Paquet, to intervene on our behalf. His response did not surprise us. The mediator first had to inform himself about the matter. He didn't know whether such an intervention fell within his responsibilities. Meanwhile, the press was developing a campaign of suspicion against us. More and more people began speaking about pimps supposedly pulling the strings behind the scenes. Until now, since they could not ridicule us, they had simply reported the facts. But because the movement had grown too much, they now tried to undermine it by declaring it corrupt. Did they really think that women, and prostitutes even more so, were incapable of organising themselves with such unity unless men were behind them whispering ideas? The French Institute of Public Opinion published the results of a survey on prostitution. The figures were quite revealing of what people thought about us. Everyone agreed that prostitution should continue provided the women weren't visible. 93% of those agreed that prostitution would always exist. 73% found the presence of girls in the street intolerable, and 78% supported regulating prostitution. 65% supported regulating prostitution within brothels. The day ended without us having made contact with anyone from government, but still we remained hopeful. We had appealed to so many people that perhaps one of them would finally decide to act. Tuesday, 10th of June. At last, someone moved, but the same old way. A movement that had begun under repression was destined, it seemed, to end under repression. At 5 o'clock in the morning, the minister launched a major police operation to clear the churches. In Lyon, it was 6 o'clock. Everyone was asleep in Saint Nizier except the women guarding the doors. The telephone rang. Supposedly, there was an urgent message for Allah. Father Bial went towards the church to warn us. As soon as the door opened, several plainclothes police officers rushed at him, pushed him aside, and twisted his arms behind his back. The women on guard began shouting, "The cops! The cops!" I only barely had enough time to pull on my dress before I saw around 100 police officers advancing. First, the vice squad, in plain clothes. Then behind them, the riot police, wearing helmets and carrying batons and grenades. There were also around 20 police dogs. The officers shouted, "Find Allah and Barbara." Allah and I tried to calm the women down. We all sat on the floor. I then rushed towards the room, intending to ring the church bells. About a dozen uniformed police officers threw themselves on top of me. They tore me and Allah apart. However much I struggled, kicking and punching, they were stronger. I found myself outside, doubled over from kicks to the stomach, my dress torn. I tried to get back on my feet and walk with dignity towards the police van. The officers pushed me along, punching me. They slammed my head against the seat inside the van. Allah clung to me. At first, the police pulled her by her hair. Then they struck her violently on the head. She lost consciousness and was carried to hospital on a stretcher. Another woman travelled with me in the van. She too had been kicked repeatedly in the back. For a month, she carried the imprint of a man's shoe on her skin. The van took us to the Molière police station. There, I remember one policeman looking at me and saying, "You're not even crying." Why should I have cried? We had won the finest of battles. We had forced people to recognise that we existed, and we had escaped prison. Even the police intervention ultimately served our cause. It once again demonstrated the courage of the forces of order who needed 120 armed men and 20 dogs and tear gas grenades to throw roughly 100 sleeping women out of a church. Once again, the press spoke only of Allah and Barbara, the stars, but the other women had been beaten and injured. One had been dragged outside by her hair, leaving part of her scalp torn away. Another had been struck in the leg by a grenade. And so we had been mistaken. Even inside a church, we were not safe. Every church where prostitutes had sought refuge was cleared in exactly the same way, at exactly the same time. As they entered, the police claimed they were acting on the orders of the Archbishop. It was not a very convincing lie. None of us believed it. We knew very well who had ordered the operation. The government's silence throughout the week of our occupation had spoken volumes. The minister had inaugurated, in glorious fashion, his new position as the Secretary of State for Women's Affairs. We were kept for just over an hour at the police station before the chief inspector released us. Officers from the vice squad then accompanied us back to Saint Nizier so that we could collect our bags and personal belongings. The police were still there, but they now denied having used any violence against the women. Apparently no one had struck anyone. To hear them tell it, we had thrown ourselves against their fists. Outside the church, a friend from Lyon was waiting for me with tears in his eyes. He walked me back to my hotel, but it was not yet time for tears. We had to gather the women together and organise ourselves. Ulla, who had been taken to the hospital, could not be found, but the other women were there. That afternoon, we managed to assemble almost all of them in the hall of the Connick cinema, which a youth association had placed at our disposal. At the end of the meeting, we elected delegates for each district and decided to organise as quickly as possible a National General Assembly of Prostitutes, attended by women from every city. We also opened a notebook in which suggestions could be collected to prepare that gathering. At midday, our minister commented on the radio about his decision to throw us out. He said that order had to be restored to places of worship. Then he repeated his favourite refrain: "Those who organise the demonstrations in the churches are pimps." Our request for dialogue had been answered with force. Some of the women in Marseille had even been charged with assault and causing injuries. But the movement remained standing, precisely because it had been repressed. The same evening, during a press conference, the NID recognised our strength in these words: "The prostitutes are organising themselves and becoming aware of the collective body they represent." The NID also underlined the importance of this moment in the history of prostitution itself, seeing it as a promising sign of the liberation of both personal and collective advancement. Wednesday, the 11th of June. After the meeting at Le Connick cinema and the statements issued by the Lyon NID, the prostitutes were heavily sought after by the press. We had to define our position and make it clear. Since Ulla had not returned after the eviction of the church, I agreed to speak on behalf of the women. Here is the essence of what I thought at the time, as published in Liberation on the 12th of June. After the discussions we had together during the occupation, we all felt the need to meet with one another. We felt we needed a way of coming together. Not a trade union or a political party or a feminist group, but something that truly belongs to us prostitutes. First of all, everyone must be able to speak. Every woman. That will take time. It must happen little by little, just as it did in Lyon by organising discussions with delegates from each district. We need a way of giving lasting form to the collective strength that we have demonstrated, to determine our own future. We must organise and defend ourselves. At the same time, everyone now seems eager to help us. The mediator, the minister, Gerard, D'Estaing. I have even learned that a civil servant is to be assigned to Miss Vale to study our situation. That is all very well, but meanwhile we are being completely forgotten. This famous legal status everyone keeps talking about seems likely to be created without us. Everything I have heard today convinces me that I am not speaking in my own name. We are all in agreement. Those best placed to know what is good for prostitutes are prostitutes themselves. Our legal status will have to be discussed by us, not imposed upon us. The National Assemblies of Prostitutes should at least serve that purpose, because there is no question, and I want to be absolutely clear about this, speaking once again on behalf of all the women, there is no question that we should be locked away in some form of brothel, whatever shape that may take, simply because everyone else feels like it. We will not be sent to prison, we will not be made to lose our children, our own little corners of happiness, and neither will we allow ourselves to be shut away again in brothels. I also announced to the journalist that I had lodged a complaint through Mr. Boyer against persons unknown for assault and battery. Those responsible were the police officers who had beaten me at Saint Nizier. Saint Nizier had been occupied and then evacuated. It was a moment in our lives we would never forget. The prostitutes had proved in the face of a hostile public opinion that they were women of dignity, courage and solidarity. I owe a tribute to every one of them. I want to thank them for showing such courage, because the occupation of Saint Nizier was an extremely difficult and emotional ordeal. Thank you to the older women who helped maintain calm and lift the spirits of the younger ones. Thank you to all of you for enduring 8 days of confinement while putting your own personal problems aside. It is thanks to the prostitutes of Saint Nizier that I learned to believe in myself, and if I was able to leave prostitution, it was because of them. Thank you also to the people outside who helped us and showed us their sympathy. Thanks to them, we rediscovered generosity and solidarity. We experienced the dignity as women that we had been demanding so desperately. It is impossible to say enough about what we owed the activists and the friends of Lenid, especially Father Louis Blanc, who, out of friendship for all of us, agreed to remain in the church day and night with us. He was not afraid of public opinion, nor of the filthy press that later accused him at the Paris General Assembly at sitting at the table of shame. He risked his reputation. The police even questioned his superior, insinuating that he was one of our pimps. And all of this simply because he, as a priest, chose to spend time with and help prostitutes. Saint Nizier is now long behind us, but no one will ever forget it. A few days after the occupation, one of the women declared, "For me, nothing will ever be the same again. In 10 days, I lived through experiences that were beyond anything I had ever imagined possible. Now I am trying to put everything back in order to understand it, but I have a feeling that that will take longer than the occupation itself." Liberation, 13th of June. That is the end of chapter 8. That was a long one, obviously covering the entire sort of first-hand chronology of the occupation. But there is plenty more to go after the occupation, which I'll be back with in another part tomorrow or possibly the day after. Thank you for listening. See you tomorrow.